Hello all, this is the Owl, and as requested, we're back to the weird stuff today. By way of our first Aubade patron request, we will be looking at Shibuya Goldfish, which, along with Hoseki no Kuni, Pumpkin Night, Higurashi, Shiki, Terraformars, Biomega, Parasite, okay, I get a lot of requests, is one of the most highly requested manga on this channel. And where do I even start with this one? Well, the What the Fuckalypse genre is essentially a genre parody of zombie apocalypse stories, often incorporating tropes and ideas from Japanese apocalypse stories like Violence Jack, and they are very much their own thing. Much like the dark magical girl phenomenon, there are so many of the bloody things now that they've honestly become kind of a genre in their own right, with their own tempo, tropes, and structure. Essentially, something completely bizarre, such as animals with human faces or mascot costumes, gain some kind of malevolent sentience and attempt to wipe out humanity. Enter a ton of gore, squick, boobs, a down-on-his-luck main character who often gets superpowers of some kind, said character's high school love interest, a skeevy horny guy that always turns out to be a rapey villain, a cast of survivors, most of whom are there to be fridged as soon as you like them, and have the general survival rate of chickens in a blast furnace, generally a government conspiracy of some kind, sometimes aliens or straight up magic, and by the end, everything descends into complete monkey balls insanity. You get the drift. And then you get today's manga, which, after reading this Benadryl trip again, seems to be both a parody of and a subversion of What the Fuckalypse stories in its own right. And yeah, that's a thinker. This one is pretty divisive, being given the tag of worst manga ever more than once, and basically every review I've read on this thing is quite negative. And yet, it's certainly developed a bizarrely large cult following, got 11 sodding volumes, people keep asking me to cover it, and frigging Hiroya Oku is a huge fan, as is clearly somebody at CD Projekt Red. So, what happens when you parody a parody? What happens when you try to clone a clone? Or photocopy a photocopy? Do you get something interesting, or just something faded and weak? Is this whole manga just a high-effort shitpost? Is this a case of so bad it's good? Or could there be more to this thing than meets the eye? Today, we'll be taking a look. Shibuya Goldfish is penned by the reclusive and pretty obscure Hirofumi Aoi. Yeah, I'm not kidding. This guy is hard to find details on, as he's made this, some random furry thing, and that's pretty much it. So, in this introductory section where I usually talk about the author, this is where I ask for anything you can find, my dear viewers, post it in the comments, and if it's suitable, I will insert it into part 2, and B, I talk about something else. C, this is, in a big way, not just a parody of weird-ass apocalypse manga, it's also a socio-cultural critique of young, prosperous, metropolitan Japanese life, much in the same way that Satogashi and Higurashi are about rural Japanese life. A huge part of this story is about its setting, Shibuya, and the surrounding areas. Tokyo is its own thing, so much so that folks in Japan will often jokingly say that it's another country. But Tokyo isn't just one place. It's actually a whole bunch of places that expanded out and eventually merged together into the mammoth city we know today. These different so-called wards often have their own distinct characters and moods, ditto the areas within them, to the point where Does anyone remember those Anthro internet site comics where we got to see all the websites if they were people? Remember? MySpace was a ghost, I think, and 4chan was... I still don't know what that is. Yeah, I'm an old fart. Well, if places in Tokyo were people, I guess Roppongi and Kabukicho would be seedy old gangsters or maybe a hooker. Sanya would be a day worker, Akihabara would be a nerd, Taito would be a samurai, and Shibuya would be an insufferable hipster. It's a very strange place. Expensive, filled with fashion victims, wealthy students, gyaru, the aforementioned hipsters, and generally young folks. It feels a bit like a university town at night. Well, aside from some of the sketchier establishments. It's also astonishingly progressive for Japan, being one of the first areas to basically legitimize and recognize same-sex couples as any sort of legal union. And yet, I'm not a big fan of Shibuya. There's something off about it all, like an expensive perfume being used to cover a really bad fart. Or that mate of yours who goes on about capitalist oppression, the socialist utopia, and the plight of the working class, but refuses to tip. And, strangely enough, I think that the author of this thing might have a similar impression. We'll get there. I have a feeling that a lot of this story is about Shibuya and its hidden jagged edges. That have to admit, it kind of drew me in. And at the end of the day, I do enjoy it. It has a zany Z-movie sensibility, some pretty fun characters and sequences, some surprisingly good art here and there, a ton of fun references, some really interesting cultural stuff to go into, and of course, absolute buckets of gore. Now, last thing, before we get going, yes, another longish intro, but this will also eventually be compiled into a gigantic mega video once we're done, so it is what it is. I will be covering this a bit differently. We won't strictly be doing one volume per video aside from this one. Later videos will probably cover multiple volumes. I will also be cutting and censoring a lot of panels as this one is pretty grisly. It's not Magical Girl Apocalypse levels of gore or Magical Girl Sight levels of edginess, but it's still got a lot of stuff that the YouTube gods would frown on. And with that out of the way, it's time to dive on into the madness. Welcome to Shibuya Goldfish. Enjoy your stay. Volume 1 starts out in medias res, like basically all manga like this seem to do, with a brief full-color segment that feels weirdly manhwa-ish. That statue in the background, by the way, we'll go into it in just a bit, as this is kind of fun. But yeah, something nasty has clearly happened, and it's all gone rather bloody. We then go back in time and meet our protagonist, Hajime Tsukiyoda, the shy, good-natured, down-on-his-luck high school nerd, unlucky in life and love, impossibly good-hearted, more handsome than he realizes, and probably going to turn out to be basically superhuman or the chosen one in some respect. He's busy making an amateur film, and right now, he's recording footage around the globally famous Hachiko statue near Shibuya Station and the iconic Shibuya crosswalk, and okay, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this manga is just soaked in Shibuya iconography and culture, and this statue is one of the most well-known in Japan, as is the story behind it, which I suspect you've heard some variation of, especially if you're a fan of Futurama. In a nutshell, Hachiko was an Akita dog adopted by his owner in pre-World War II Japan, and the two were inseparable. Hachiko would walk his owner to the station every morning and then come and wait for him in the afternoon. One day, the owner died unexpectedly while at work, so Hachiko came and waited but his owner never returned. Nonetheless, the loyal puppers would, every afternoon, walk down to the station to wait for his owner, Fry's dog style. And yeah, I really do think that Fry's dog was inspired by the story, and also yeah, I bet you every old fart watching this is dabbing at their eyes right now. Bloody hell, was that episode too much. And no, I do not know conclusively that this was inspired by Hachiko. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, this lasted an astonishing amount of time. Almost a decade, with the dog coming every day, rain, snow, wind or shine, to wait patiently for his owner to return until the dog eventually died. By then, it had become pretty famous, and Hachiko was eventually cremated and buried next to his owner. The story, since then, has become somewhat well known all over the world, with multiple movies made, including the hell? Richard Gere? What is this world sometimes? Anyway, we get to know more about Hajime and his friends. Although, yes, this being what it is, everyone but his crush are, well, let's just say we're basically looking at the future buffet right now because Apocalypse manga. Sure enough, he has a thing for the outgoing and much pursued school hottie, Fukakusa, a surprisingly hard to pronounce name, and his similarly unpopular friends want to bring him to a mixer, but he's more interested in his amateur film. And okay, we will have quite a few references to mixers as the story progresses, which makes me suspect that Aoi is a bit of a lonely dude himself. But this is a term that is probably an attempt at translating the phenomenon of gokon, or formally organized group dates. During the last 50 years or so, due to the declining birth rate, municipalities or just groups of citizens have begun to arrange fairly large drinking parties where men and women looking to meet a partner can attend, get a bit liquored up, play some silly games to break the ice, form friendships, hopefully start dating, and eventually getting married, leading to them having kids, and this has accomplished, shall we say, mixed results. See, these are surprisingly not supposed to be just for hookups or one-night stands. They're supposed to be for forming lasting relationships. And of course, they are quite heavily criticized, especially now, for going in exactly that direction far too much of the time, or being arranged by groups of skeevy or opportunistic guys looking to get girls drunk and have a quick shag. They have fallen out of fashion, in fact, in recent years, partially due to this, and partially due to the incredible proliferation of online hookups, ditto so-called, let's say, dating sites like Tinder. But they are still a thing, especially in more urban areas. Anyway, as mentioned earlier, we learn that Hajime is not the biggest fan of Shibuya. To him, it's mostly for fashionable, rich, gregarious, attractive young people, not shy film nerds. And yes, see those white borders on characters and foreground items. If you've been on this channel for a while now, you would remember that this is in fact Hiroya Oku's thing of taking a photograph of a place, drawing over it, and then superimposing images over it. Mrs. Owl says that I actually explain this slightly wrong all the time, but she's the artsy one of the two of us, so feel free to ask her on the Discord. It's very common now, and pretty popular in seinen, likely due to the more realistic or photorealistic effect it creates. And it's a trick that, while yes, it can indeed look pretty janky at times, I've always kind of liked it, and we will see it being used to great effect in the manga, with more than one panel as a deliberate wink and nod sort of gag. As he continues his walkabout, Hajime walks into a department store and spots several Yankee types. Watch my Gantz video if you want to know more about the Yankee phenomenon, but in short, let's say somewhere between punks, delinquents, and gang members cornering and hassling a girl. Yeah, much like the now globally notorious subway groping, this is something that is a problem. Aggressive, often younger Yankee types isolating and bothering girls, sometimes trying to force them to go places with them, occasionally by, force or coercion, but it's not as common as anime and manga would have you believe. Especially not now, with a ton of public campaigns and mandates about it, and police instructed to come down like a ton of bricks on anyone even accused of it. As he's that sort of protagonist, Hajime knocks over a bookshelf, causing the shopkeep to appear and the Yankees to vanish, before realizing that, it's this trope. It's his school crush, Fukakusa. And surprise, surprise, she's actually a closet film nerd herself and implies that she's always had a bit of a crush. Only they spot something weirdly organic lying on the floor. Oh right, this manga, like most What the Fuckalip stories, is incredibly gory, so I will have to censor some of the more extreme panels, but it's half a human head being munched on by this nightmare fuel. Meet our threat. Huge, carnivorous goldfish that seem to swim through the air. And it's a testament of Aoi's art that these things are rarely silly and are mostly just really frigging unsettling. And yes, just like that, we're in the poo. The pair freeze as an enormous shape begins to float towards them, and then they run for it, realizing that the mall they're in is becoming infested with these things. People seem mostly bemused, and I just realized how similar these look to part of cyberpunk. Is that a nod? Wait, didn't I say this already? This is why you don't script on baby amounts of sleep, I guess. Where was I? Oh right, anyway, soon limbs and organs begin to go flying, and we also realize that the goldfish are speaking in a human language, and that they assumably steal the voices of their victims like frigging corpse sweepers. This will be a common aspect of their moving forwards, and it does contribute to them being just freaky, as well as occasionally comedic. They just repeat phrases at random, stuff their victims would have said, I guess. We also start getting a bit of the author's thesis here, as Hajime begins to realize that, well, there are many things that are worse than living out a normal, peaceful, boring life. And a sudden infestation of horrible man-eating goldfish is one of these. We'll go into this messaging more as the story progresses. Sure enough, we see that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of the things just rampaging around as Hajime and Fukakusa sprint down the streets, trying desperately to reach the station to escape Shibuya. However, when they arrive, they quickly realize that nope, the trains have lost power and they are stranded. However, a train begins to somehow arrive, and this gets everyone's hopes up before we realize that it's completely out of control. And after a particularly, no, this crash panel is just awesome. Seriously, the art in this thing has no right to slap as hard as it frequently does. We also get a pretty obvious reference to the good but hello comments section, slightly overrated Kubrick adaptation of The Shining, as the doors of a train open, revealing a bunch of goldfish and just people soup. Yeah, that's pretty metal. They flee again, but Fukakusa seems to be flagging and tells Hajime that she's getting tired and that she doesn't think she can run anymore. So Hajime tells her to go through the door ahead of a nearby building, and he will do his best to distract them. which he does manage to do and then dashes after her, only to have her shut the door in his face. Oh dears. It turns out that, okay, so this is a bit of a trope subversion here. She's actually a stone cold bee with an itch, as she begins to yell insults at him, saying that no, she won't open the door, saying that he's lucky she even gave him the time of day, and that a loser like him should just be her human shield and happily die. Before she begins to beg for help again, the door opens, and yeah, that's a creepy panel. Well done. Realizing that he's actually pretty much doomed, and that his uneventful life has sort of come to an end. To him, there isn't much reason to keep going in this dreadful new world. So he, to put it in YouTube-friendly terms, decides to unsubscribe from Breathing Plus and just jumps out of the building. But he bounces off the swarming goldfish midair, and when he hits the ground, Hajime has somehow survived without being street pizza, but he is knocked unconscious. When he comes to, he, once again, experiences a horrible nightmare, realizing that nearly everyone in Shibuya, including his crush and all of his friends, more than likely are already dead, only to awaken again in a coffee shop with a handful of other survivors, including a strangely dressed young lady who, we will later learn, is named Alisa. As to her clothing, we'll get there. Anyway, he's been out of it for maybe 2 days, turns out. They're in another department store, in a small cafe on the 6th floor, but are now trapped in more ways than one. See, it turns out that, okay, go home Manga, you're drunk. Shibuya is now trapped in the middle of a fishbowl, sort of an inside the dome, as it were. Yeah, there's a deep cut. And yes, this is completely insane, and yes, this will sort of be explained way later in this story. The leader of the group, a striking but eccentric female cop, and easily my favorite of the early characters, Uncle, introduces herself, and when Hajime realizes that he's left his camera behind, Alisa surprisingly says that she will come and help him look. She also knows what it's like to have something special that you can't lose. Oh, and we do find out here why she's dressed like a bad Dead by Daylight skin. She's an aspiring idol. And yeah, alright, this is gonna require a bit of explanation. And you know what? As with Gantz, we'll be giving this bit its own section, as it's one of those big cultural things that will probably be sort of interesting, but only to those curious about such things. So if you aren't interested in the cultural analysis side of this video, feel free to skip the next section. Okay. So, Alisa's clothes identify her as an idol, which she says is her dream. The word idol in Japan has a subtly but importantly different meaning to what you'd think of when you'd hear the term in the West, where it seems mostly synonymous with pop star, as in, you know, American Idol. Wait, is that still even a thing? While yes, it does have some connection to singing, generally pop music, it actually normally applies more to a younger, generally teenage or early 20s, fashionable girl trained as an actor, a dancer, a singer, and a general entertainer. They maintain a carefully crafted public image to deliberately cultivate a parasocial relationship with fans. Although yes, male idols are also a thing, albeit not quite as commonly outside of boy bands and the like. I guess the term entertainer might be slightly more apropos, but like so many aspects of Japanese culture, it does not translate perfectly. Japanese idols are their own thing. they're themed to attract a certain type of fan. For instance, a nerd girl to attract gamers. Or, oh yeah, if you remember this character from Jujutsu Kaisen, that's another great example of this. There are also a subset of idols that are, well, younger than the age of majority, but again, that is a rabbit hole we are not going down today for obvious reasons. If we do eventually tackle Magical Girl's site, well, we'll have to talk about it there. Idol culture goes back quite a ways, but it has its modern roots in the 60s, with Johnny Kitagawa and his talent agency being likely the first true idol manufacturing machine. And yeah, anyone who knows that name probably just winced. Let's just say there's another rabbit hole that we won't be going down in this video. Feel free to Google it if you want to be depressed for a while. Regardless, idol culture really saw a boom in the 80s and 90s, which is when it took on its now more formalized nature. A lot of young people really want to be idols, seeing them as aspiration figures and celebrities, wanting the popularity, the glamour, and the success that they seem to project. And yes, Shibuya is absolutely lousy with aspiring idols, people recruiting idols, and advertisements for idols or idol groups. However, idol culture, especially in Japan, is so poisonous, so scandal-ridden, and so top-to-bottom foobar that it's hard to fully express, and quite a few manga have delved into this side of the industry. Not only is it pretty exploitative, in that idols are recruited fairly young and are often tricked into signing binding, bizarre, incredibly one-sided contracts that result in them becoming essentially enslaved, receiving virtually no compensation and appalling working conditions despite their prosperous public image. But sexual exploitation, blackmail, coerced pornography, physical violence, intimidation, and more are so commonplace that they are almost understood to be part of the industry. Beyond this, idols, due to these contracts, are essentially prisoners to their managers. They're forced to isolate themselves from friends and family, and are forbidden from really forming any actual relationships, let alone romantic relationships, and are not even permitted to attend school, leaving them poor and without many future prospects after their forced retirement or graduation at around age 25, and are frequently bound by strict and rigidly enforced lifelong NDA agreements, which are in many cases backed up by the courts. And yeah, there have been so many public scandals as of late, as well as several court cases over the years. But keep in mind that Japanese courts are also a whole other thing, and they really do not care too much about any sort of public image or precedent, and thus decisions have gone both ways, which is partially because of idols existing in murky legal water, where this is not recognized as employment and more as a hobby, resulting in some truly notorious cases, such as that of a teenage idol being sued for violating her contract after she was seen in a hotel room with 2 male fans, the judge upholding this and forcing her to pay well over 500,000 yen in damages. Yeah, the idol industry is just really skeevy in many respects. So, how does this all pertain to the character of Elisa? Well, we'll see. Back with Hajime and Elisa, we see that she's actually not very popular at all yet, but was given her wristband by her first fan, an elementary schooler, making it very near and dear her heart, her most prized possession actually. And yes, keep this in mind, it will play into the story quite a bit as we progress. No, seriously, entire catastrophic events revolve around this bloody item. Taken aback by her surprising steadfastness, Hajime realizes that he's always just sort of muddled through life, but she encourages him to push further. If he is serious about being a filmmaker, well, he should chase that dream down, and they prepare to head below, but are joined by Anko and her assistant, ? Regardless, they've got a pretty cute will they won't they relationship, and I genuinely enjoy these two. It would be such a pity if something absolutely atrocious was to happen to two such likable characters. Oh yeah, as always, I'm skipping a lot of the manga, so I would recommend checking it out for yourself if you want to see more. The characterization in this thing is far from bad. Down below, however, they find an absolute charnel house and realize that this might not have been the best idea ever. And while they do find Hajime's camera, they see baby fish beginning to spawn from the corpses in a genuinely grisly fashion. They flee, and Anko prepares to sacrifice herself, but Hajime, remembering how he survived vis-a-vis he was covered in garbage, realizes that the fish hunt by scent, and so they are able to survive unobserved by covering themselves in women's perfume. I'm not sure if that would work, but yes, it is actually true. Fish do hunt primarily by scent, although not quite as we think of the term. They thus realize that despite their monstrous size and carnivorous natures, and, you know, the whole talking thing, and I guess the flying, the creatures really do act just like regular goldfish, and thus they should attempt to locate a fish expert to help them better understand what's going on and maybe find a solution of some sort. However, before they can discuss this further, they hear the sound of helicopter blades outside, and then an announcement. There will be a one-time rescue attempt at 5 a.m. the next morning, and any survivors that don't want to wind up as fish poop need to get to the designated areas for extraction, one of them being the iconic scramble crossing in front of their building. This crossing, as you've probably gleaned from pop culture, is as iconic of Shibuya as, say, the Glico sign is for Osaka, Times Square is for New York, or street crime is for Johannesburg. Yes, I can say it. It's actually the busiest crossing in the entire world, with hundreds of thousands to millions of people crossing every day, basically 24/7. And of course, it's been featured in numerous video games, movies, and pieces of art. Anyway, they prepare to go back and tell the other survivors when Anko's assistant suddenly begins to gush blood and scream before, this happens. Woof. Yeah, no. It's actually a freaky as hell image, and while I don't fully understand what's happening here, it's kind of sad. Another genuinely likable character dies a pretty wretched death. They manage to struggle their way back to base, and once there, discuss the impending rescue effort with the other survivors. They unfortunately seem lackadaisical and mostly surrender to their fate, with a general despair about even surviving that long, let alone managing to reach the helicopters in time, as this would necessitate making their way down through the building, the train station behind it, then out and along the street towards the extraction point. Nonetheless, Elisa manages to rally everyone in another, actually fairly effective emotional beat, and they all begin to make plans. If these things really are just some sort of weird goldfish, they are diurnal, meaning that the survivors should be relatively safe at night, so long as they don't wake the monsters, and thus, with a strategy laid down, they catch a brief rest. Tomorrow is going to be eventful. The next morning, in the very wee hours, half an hour before extraction, the survivors begin preparing, getting themselves covered in perfume and quietly sneaking through bloody, deserted stores, down floor by floor, corridor by corridor, desperately trying to not wake sleeping fish. Eventually, they reach the station and realize that many fish down here are awake. In fact, they're cannibalizing the wounded ones. However, a phone alarm results in a fight and an ensuing panic attack, and this immediately leads to disaster as all the fish in the building begin to wake and zero in on them, and a few of the survivors are wiped out in the ensuing chase, with an injured uncle, Elisa, and Hajime, as well as a handful of nameless fodder surviving. Trapped and running out of time, they concoct a desperate plan and set the building on fire so that the smoke will cover their scent. It doesn't go well, and most of the rest die, with Anko sacrificing herself to push Elisa and Hajime out. Damn man, I actually really liked her, and we get to see her dying thoughts in a very sad, very Hiroya Oku bit, where she realizes that, well, her now dead assistant and her should have gotten together. Yes, while this manga is pretty silly in places, there are plenty of emotional beats that really do land. Finally, they make it, and the handful remaining stand in the rain as the helicopter searchlights sweep over them and a ladder begins to be lowered. Yeah, how many volumes was this thing again? I wonder what's gonna happen next. Womp womp. Yup, we then go back in time to earlier and see Hajime and Elisa chatting about his film, and she agrees to be in it if he comes to her concert. The two are becoming fast friends and likely something more. Back in the present, yeah, the art in this thing, while it's not what I would call mind-blowing, can actually be really, really good at times. And I do like Aoi's creative use of paneling. He's got a thing for those magnificent double spreads and has a very strong eye for lighting. Regardless, the survivors find themselves surrounded by fish and, without the helicopter, realize that they are doomed. Just then, another helicopter flies overhead and they realize that there must be another extraction point nearby, so they give chase at a flat run. As they run, the other survivors get picked off and they realize that the extraction point must be Miyashita Park. Oh, this is interesting. Miyashita was one of the few parks in Shibuya and was also known for its sizable homeless encampments. We'll get to that later on, don't worry. But it was closed shortly after this manga began publication, to be reopened a few years ago as a shopping mall. They find and steal a van and begin driving hell for leather towards the park before they see a pole in the middle of the road. What the hell? Oh dear, it's goldfish poo. Goldfish poo made of people. That's... how am I supposed to feel here? I'm honestly not sure whether to be amused or horrified, to be honest. But regardless, they collide with the ghastly thing at high speed, totaling the van, and most of the remnant die. But Hajime, in a kind of legit badass moment, completely snaps and ignites the spilled petrol, realizing that the fish cannot withstand sudden changes in air temperature, annihilating the ones nearby and opening a route for the final three to dash for the helicopter. As the SDF troops lay down covering fire, they wind their way closer and are pulled into the air. But yeah, narrative causality, Elisa's beloved wristband falls off, and as she leans out to grab it, she loses her grip and tumbles down to the street below, and Hajime leaps down after her into a circle of waiting goldfish. Okay then, by way of a Volume 1 epilogue, we see a strange and rather barbarian looking young man easily killing goldfish with a huge ryoba saw. a woodworking tool that I've actually never seen outside of Japan. Although I have heard the term ripsaw used in relation to it, I'm sure there's at least one person who knows carpentry here. What do you call one of these in the West? Let me know in the comments. Regardless, he actually seems quite happy with the new status quo. And yes, this very Violence Jack-inspired character will be essential to the story moving forwards, and we'll be meeting him in Volume 2. He's a trip, but that's where we'll leave it for today. And yes, as I've said, I kind of like Shibuya Goldfish. I mean, it's not going to unseat stuff like I Am a Hero, but as far as this sort of what the fuckalypse story goes, it's pretty damn good. And I would kind of recommend that you read it for yourselves. Anyway, before we finish for the day, I just want to say, as always, a massive and heartfelt thanks to my amazing patrons, without whom this channel would long ago have ceased to exist. Cheddar, Crazy, Question Man 6, Starwin Marwin, Hunting for R2D2, Kel Core, Opinion Custard, Piece of Yeast, Ranger Danger, Rose Montgomery, Wargle, The Empress, Inukia Koji, Cheshire Quill, Endymion, Aaron Arnold, Jake, Just Zero, Lance Goebel, Lucian, Rafferty, Simone, Jake Ramsey, and Squid. I also want to give a very special thanks to our Aubade patrons, Jathis and Polite Crow. That is so generous, I don't even know what to say. If you want to help us out by supporting the channel, please head on over to our Patreon. You will also earn early videos, exclusive content, Discord perks, including a patrons only channel, as well as some other fun stuff, and more. If you want to support us further or commission some art from the amazingly talented Mrs. Owl, you could hit her up on our Discord or her business email. All links, as always, are in the description. Otherwise, take care all, and cheers. I will see you next time. This is the Owl, signing off.